Many people reach prosperity. Few are able to keep it. They get opportunities, money, growth, visibility, and somehow everything slips through their fingers. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack faith, and not because they didn't work hard enough. They lose it because they were never trained to govern their emotions. Prosperity doesn't collapse suddenly. It erodes quietly, through impulsive decisions, through emotional reactions, through moments where feelings take control and discipline steps aside. Emotionally undisciplined people don't fail because they are weak. They fail because their inner world is unstable. One bad day ruins consistency. One frustration breaks routine. One comparison destroys focus. And without realizing it, they build their lives on emotional weather instead of inner government. Today, we're not talking about motivation. We're talking about mastery. Because prosperity is not sustained by excitement. It is sustained by emotional maturity. And until your emotions stop ruling your decisions, growth will always be temporary. Listen carefully. Because the difference between those who rise and those who fall is not opportunity. It's emotional discipline. Prosperity is not lost first in the bank account. It is lost inside. Long before money disappears, opportunities fade, or discipline breaks, something much more subtle happens. Emotional instability takes control. Most people believe prosperity is sustained by intelligence, effort, or faith alone. But time proves something different. There are intelligent people who never grow, hard-working people who burn out, faithful people who keep starting over. The missing piece is not knowledge, it is emotional governance. Emotionally undisciplined people build their lives on feelings. When they feel motivated, they act. When they feel discouraged, they stop. When they feel confident, they commit. When they feel frustrated, they abandon. Their progress depends on how they feel that day, and feelings are unstable. One bad morning can undo weeks of discipline. One emotional trigger can destroy consistency. One moment of frustration can cancel long-term vision. This is how prosperity collapses quietly, not through failure, but through fluctuation. Prosperity demands emotional stability because growth is not emotionally comfortable. Progress requires repetition, patience, delayed gratification, and the ability to continue even when emotions resist. Emotionally unstable people experience growth as pressure. They interpret discomfort as a sign to stop instead of a sign to mature. They confuse emotional resistance with danger, so they retreat. They pause routines. They skip habits. They negotiate commitments, and every negotiation with emotion weakens discipline. Over time, discipline stops being a foundation and becomes an exception. Action becomes conditional. Consistency becomes rare, and prosperity becomes temporary. This is not because these people lack desire. It is because they lack emotional command. Prosperity amplifies your inner state. If your inner world is chaotic, prosperity only magnifies that chaos. More money amplifies impulsiveness. More responsibility amplifies emotional reactions. More opportunity amplifies fear and insecurity. This is why some people lose what others can barely get. They reached prosperity emotionally unprepared. Emotional discipline is what allows you to remain stable when emotions fluctuate. It teaches you to act from principle instead of mood, from commitment instead of comfort, from long-term vision instead of short-term relief. Without emotional discipline, prosperity is always fragile. You can gain quickly. You can grow suddenly, but you will not sustain. Because sustainability requires something emotion alone cannot provide: governance. And governance begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I feel?" before acting, and start asking, "What must be done regardless of how I feel?" That shift changes everything. Prosperity does not stay where emotions rule. It stays where emotions are guided, and until emotions learn to obey discipline, prosperity will always come and go. Most people don't destroy their future with one big mistake. They destroy it through small emotional reactions, repeated daily, almost invisibly. These reactions don't feel dangerous. They feel justified, human, understandable. And that's exactly why they are so destructive. An emotional reaction happens when a feeling makes a decision for you before discipline has a chance to speak. You feel tired, so you skip what matters. You feel frustrated, so you abandon consistency. You feel anxious, so you delay action. You feel offended, so you disengage. None of these moments feel like failure. They feel like self-care, protection, or rest. But over time, they form a pattern. Emotion replaces command. Emotionally undisciplined people live reacting instead of leading. Their lives are shaped by emotional impulses rather than intentional direction. They don't wake up deciding to sabotage themselves. They simply follow how they feel. And feelings are short-sighted. Emotion seeks relief, not growth. Emotion seeks comfort, not construction. Emotion seeks escape, not endurance. This is why emotional reactions slowly erode discipline. Discipline requires staying when leaving feels easier. Emotion demands leaving when staying feels uncomfortable. Every time emotion wins, discipline weakens. At first, the damage is subtle. You miss a day, you skip a habit, you postpone a task, you tell yourself you'll return tomorrow. But emotional reactions multiply. Soon discipline becomes optional. Action becomes conditional. Progress depends on mood, and prosperity cannot survive in a conditional environment. One of the most dangerous lies people believe is, "I'll do it when I feel better." That sentence has destroyed more destinies than failure ever did, because life does not wait for emotional alignment. Opportunities move, time moves, growth requires action before comfort arrives. Emotionally disciplined people understand something crucial. Feelings are information, not instructions. You can feel tired and still act. You can feel discouraged and still continue. You can feel fear and still move forward. But emotional reactions blur that distinction. They make emotion the authority instead of the signal. This is especially dangerous in prosperity because growth introduces pressure. Pressure triggers emotion, and without emotional governance, pressure creates collapse. Many people lose discipline not because the task is hard, but because the emotion attached to the task is uncomfortable. They avoid discomfort instead of mastering it. They don't train themselves to stay present during emotional resistance. They train themselves to escape it, and escape becomes habit. Over time, the mind learns a dangerous rule. Whenever it feels hard, we stop. That rule kills prosperity. Because prosperity is built in moments where stopping feels justified, but continuing is necessary. Emotional discipline is not about suppressing emotion. It is about refusing to let emotion decide your direction. You are allowed to feel everything. You are not allowed to let feeling cancel commitment. The moment you learn to pause between feeling and reacting, power returns. That pause is where discipline lives. And without that pause, emotion will quietly dismantle everything you are trying to build. Motivation is emotional, and everything emotional is temporary. This is the truth most people resist accepting. They wait to feel ready before acting. They wait to feel inspired, confident, energized, aligned. And while they wait, life moves on without them. Motivation rises quickly and falls just as fast. It is fueled by emotion, environment, and external stimulus. A video, a conversation, a moment of excitement can create motivation. But the same emotion that rises can disappear the moment discomfort appears. This is why motivation cannot sustain prosperity. Emotionally undisciplined people build their lives on motivation. When motivation is present, they feel powerful. They start routines, make promises, set goals. But when motivation fades, and it always does, everything stops. They don't stop because the goal lost value. They stop because emotion lost intensity. Discipline, on the other hand, is not emotional. Discipline is a decision repeated regardless of feeling. It is action anchored in commitment, not mood. Emotionally disciplined people understand something most people never learn. Waiting to feel motivated is a form of procrastination disguised as wisdom. They don't ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" They ask, "Is this aligned with what I decided to build?" This shift is everything. Motivation seeks pleasure. Discipline seeks direction. Motivation reacts to emotion. Discipline responds to intention. Prosperity is built during moments where motivation is absent, where the task feels heavy. where progress feels slow, where the emotional reward is delayed. Emotionally undisciplined people interpret these moments as signs to stop. They believe resistance means something is wrong, but resistance is not a warning. It is a training ground. Discipline teaches the nervous system that action is possible even when emotion resists. Over time, the brain learns a powerful lesson. I don't need to feel ready to move. This lesson changes behavior permanently. Motivation becomes optional. Consistency becomes natural. Progress becomes inevitable. Discipline also creates confidence, not emotional confidence, but structural confidence. Confidence that comes from self-trust, from knowing you will show up even when emotion fluctuates. Emotionally undisciplined people chase motivation because they don't trust themselves without it. They need the feeling to guarantee action. Emotionally disciplined people trust their decisions. They understand that emotion will follow action, not the other way around. This is why discipline prevails. Because discipline does not negotiate with emotion. It acknowledges emotion and continues anyway. Prosperity does not grow in moments of excitement. It grows in moments of obedience to purpose. And until motivation stops being your master and discipline becomes your guide, prosperity will always remain fragile. Discipline is not the absence of emotion. It is the refusal to let emotion decide your future. Comfort feels harmless. It feels like rest, like balance, like self-care. But comfort, when misunderstood, becomes one of the most powerful enemies of growth. Emotionally undisciplined people do not fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they organize their lives around emotional ease. They choose what feels lighter instead of what builds strength. They interpret discomfort as a warning rather than as part of transformation. Growth by nature is uncomfortable. It demands repetition without immediate reward. It requires patience before results appear. It exposes weaknesses before it produces strength. And emotional comfort resists all of that. Comfort seeks relief. Growth requires endurance. When emotion is not governed, comfort becomes the authority. Decisions are filtered through one question: how will this make me feel right now? If it feels heavy, it's avoided. If it feels challenging, it's postponed. If it feels uncomfortable, it's rejected. This creates a dangerous loop. The more you avoid discomfort, the less tolerance you have for it. And the less tolerance you have, the more fragile your discipline becomes. Soon, even small challenges feel overwhelming. Emotionally undisciplined people confuse peace with ease. They believe that if something creates tension, it must be wrong. But tension is not the enemy. Unnecessary tension drains you. Necessary tension trains you. The difference is not how it feels, but what it produces. Growth-oriented tension expands capacity. It strengthens emotional muscles. It teaches your system to remain steady, even when comfort disappears. Comfort-oriented living shrinks capacity. It teaches the mind to escape whenever effort is required. This is why prosperity cannot be sustained in comfort-driven environments. Prosperity requires long-term thinking, emotional endurance, and the ability to stay consistent through resistance. Emotionally disciplined people understand this. They do not chase comfort, they chase alignment. They know discomfort is temporary, but the results of discipline are permanent. They learn to sit with emotional strain without allowing it to redirect their path. This does not mean they live in suffering. It means they choose meaning over relief. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you send a message to your nervous system. Avoid pressure. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you send a different message. I can handle this. The nervous system learns from repetition. Over time, discomfort loses its power to stop you. It no longer feels like danger. It feels like effort, and effort becomes normal. This is the turning point. When emotional ease stops being your compass, discipline becomes sustainable. Growth becomes predictable. Prosperity becomes something you can hold, not something that slips away the moment things feel hard. Comfort promises immediate relief. Growth promises lasting change. And only one of them builds a future you don't have to keep rebuilding. Most people believe prosperity will solve their inner problems. They think more money will bring peace, more success will bring confidence, More opportunity will bring balance. But prosperity does not heal emotional weakness. It reveals it. Prosperity is not gentle. It applies pressure. It increases responsibility, visibility, expectation, and decision-making, and whatever is unstable inside you becomes louder when pressure increases. This is why some people fall apart only after they grow. Before prosperity, emotional weakness can hide behind limitation. You can blame lack of resources, lack of opportunity, lack of time. But once prosperity arrives, excuses disappear, and what remains is character. Emotionally undisciplined people struggle under expansion. They become impulsive when resources increase. They overreact when expectations rise. They escape when responsibility feels heavy. Prosperity doesn't create these reactions. It exposes them. More money amplifies impulsiveness. More freedom amplifies lack of structure. More opportunity amplifies fear of failure. This is why prosperity without emotional discipline often leads to chaos instead of stability. Many people can reach growth during seasons of hunger. Hunger creates urgency. Limitation creates focus. But prosperity removes urgency, and without discipline, focus collapses. Emotionally undisciplined people rely on pressure to function. When pressure decreases, so does their structure. They relax too much, lose rhythm, abandon habits, and drift. This is why they peak and fall. Prosperity demands self-regulation. When no one is forcing you, disciplining you, or watching you, your emotional maturity becomes the deciding factor. If emotion governs behavior, freedom becomes dangerous. Freedom without discipline is not abundance, it is exposure. Emotionally disciplined people prepare for prosperity before it arrives. They build routines that don't depend on urgency. They develop emotional restraint that doesn't require fear to function. They practice consistency even when nothing external is demanding it. So when prosperity comes, it doesn't break them, it stabilizes them. This is a spiritual principle as much as a practical one. In spiritual terms, expansion reveals stewardship. What you do with more shows who you truly are. Emotional discipline is part of stewardship. It determines whether growth multiplies or collapses. Many people pray for growth, but are emotionally unprepared to manage it. They ask for more, but haven't learned to govern themselves with what they already have. Prosperity does not reward desire, it rewards readiness. And readiness is emotional. When your emotions are disciplined, prosperity becomes sustainable. Pressure no longer triggers collapse. Freedom no longer leads to excess. Growth no longer creates fear. Instead, prosperity becomes an extension of inner order. Without emotional discipline, prosperity is not a blessing. It is a test. And tests reveal what training has, or has not, taken place. That is why emotional discipline must come before expansion, not after. Because prosperity does not make you stronger. It shows how strong you already are inside. Most people think self-respect is about confidence, about how you speak, how you carry yourself, how you demand respect from others. But real self-respect is quieter and far more demanding. Self-respect is what you do when no one is watching. It is how you treat your commitments when emotion resists. It is whether your word still matters when motivation disappears. Emotional discipline is the highest form of self-respect, because every time you allow emotion to cancel what you decided in clarity, you send yourself a message. My feelings are more important than my future, and that message shapes identity. Emotionally undisciplined people don't just break routines, they break trust with themselves. They promise consistency and deliver excuses. They plan with optimism and execute with hesitation. Over time, their inner voice weakens, not because they are incapable, but because they taught themselves they won't follow through. This is why emotional discipline changes everything. When you act despite discomfort, you reinforce self-trust. You prove to yourself that your decisions matter more than your moods. You show your nervous system that resistance does not equal danger, and self-trust grows. Emotional discipline is not suppression. It does not mean ignoring feelings or denying them space. It means acknowledging emotion without surrendering leadership. You can feel tired and still act. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel doubt and still remain consistent. That ability is self-respect in action. Respecting yourself means refusing to abandon your future self for temporary emotional relief. It means choosing long-term alignment over short-term comfort. Many people confuse emotional indulgence with kindness. They believe honoring every feeling is self-care. But emotional indulgence often leads to self-betrayal. True self-care is not always gentle. Sometimes it is firm. Sometimes it says, "I understand how you feel, and we're still doing what matters." This firmness is not cruelty. It is leadership. Emotionally disciplined people lead themselves. They don't wait for emotion to cooperate. They don't negotiate with impulses. They don't require perfect conditions to remain consistent. They respect their commitments enough to continue even when emotion resists. And that respect compounds. Over time, discipline becomes identity. Acting consistently stops feeling forced. The mind adapts to structure. Resistance weakens. Confidence stabilizes. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear calm under pressure. Not because they feel less, but because they are not ruled by what they feel. Self-respect is built in these moments. Every time you show up anyway, every time you keep a promise to yourself, every time you act in alignment instead of emotion, prosperity grows where self-respect lives, because a person who respects themselves does not sabotage their own progress. They don't abandon what they are building the moment it becomes uncomfortable. They don't trade their future for temporary emotional relief. They stay. And staying, when leaving feels easier, is the quiet evidence of self-respect. This is why emotional discipline is not about control. It is about dignity. And dignity sustains prosperity long after excitement fades. Faith gives direction. Emotional discipline gives stability. When one exists without the other, collapse is only a matter of time. Many people believe faith alone is enough to sustain prosperity. They pray, believe, declare, and hope. But their lives remain inconsistent. They start with intensity and stop with the same intensity. Their faith rises and falls with their emotional state. This is not because faith is weak, it is because emotion is ruling it. Emotionally undisciplined faith is unstable. It believes strongly when things feel good and weakens when resistance appears. It trusts when results come quickly and doubts when progress is slow. It worships when inspired and withdraws when disappointed. This creates a dangerous cycle. Faith becomes emotional fuel instead of spiritual grounding, and emotional fuel burns fast. True faith is not driven by feeling. It is anchored in decision. Faith that sustains prosperity is not loud. It is consistent. It shows up on ordinary days. It obeys even when emotion resists. It remains steady when circumstances don't respond immediately. This kind of faith requires emotional discipline, because spiritual growth, just like prosperity, introduces pressure. Waiting tests patience. Silence tests trust. Delay tests commitment. Without emotional discipline, these tests feel unbearable. Emotionally undisciplined people interpret delay as rejection. They take resistance personally. They allow frustration to rewrite belief. Slowly their faith becomes conditional. I'll believe if I see. I'll continue if it works quickly. I'll obey if it feels right. But conditional faith collapses under pressure. Spiritual maturity is revealed when emotion does not dictate belief, when discomfort does not cancel obedience, when doubt does not override commitment. This is why discipline is deeply spiritual. Discipline is obedience in the absence of emotional reward. It is choosing to remain aligned when feelings fluctuate. It is staying faithful to the process, even when the process feels slow, uncomfortable, or unclear. Emotionally disciplined faith does not deny emotion. It governs it. You are allowed to feel doubt. You are allowed to feel frustration. You are allowed to feel tired. But you are not allowed to let those feelings dismantle your direction. Prosperity requires faith that endures seasons of invisibility. Growth happens underground before it appears above the surface. And only disciplined faith survives underground seasons. Many people quit, not because faith failed, but because emotion overruled it. They confuse emotional discomfort with divine resistance. They mistake silence for denial. They interpret delay as a sign to stop. But silence often means stay. Delay often means mature. Emotionally disciplined people understand this. They don't require constant reassurance to remain consistent. They don't need emotional highs to obey daily habits. Their faith is integrated into routine, not dependent on inspiration. This integration is what sustains prosperity, because faith without discipline burns out, and discipline without faith becomes empty. But when faith is grounded in emotional discipline, it becomes unshakable. It stops being a feeling, it becomes a foundation, and foundations do not collapse when emotions fluctuate, they hold. Emotionally disciplined people are not loud. They don't dominate rooms with words. They don't impress with constant confidence. They don't rely on intensity to prove strength. But they are dangerous. Dangerous to limitation. Dangerous to stagnation. Dangerous to cycles that trap others for years. Because once a person learns to govern their emotions, limitation loses its primary weapon. Limitation feeds on emotional reaction. It survives through discouragement, fear, impatience, comparison, impulsiveness, and self-doubt. These emotions don't destroy people instantly. They wear them down slowly until quitting feels reasonable. Emotionally disciplined people interrupt this process. They don't eliminate emotion. They interrupt its authority. They feel fear without stopping. They feel discomfort without retreating. They feel resistance without negotiating their direction. This makes them unpredictable to limitation. Where others stop because they feel tired, they continue. Where others retreat because they feel uncertain, they stay. Where others abandon because they feel overwhelmed, they simplify and move forward. This consistency breaks cycles. Cycles are sustained by emotional repetition. You feel discouraged, so you stop. You stop so progress stalls, so discouragement grows, and the loop continues. Emotionally disciplined people step out of the loop. They don't wait for emotion to resolve before acting. They act, and emotion adapts afterward. Over time, their nervous system learns that discomfort does not equal danger. This is when emotional power shifts. Emotion stops being a controller and becomes a signal. Fear becomes information. Anxiety becomes awareness. Discomfort becomes training. Limitation has nothing left to use. This is why emotionally disciplined people seem calm under pressure. Not because pressure disappears, but because pressure no longer controls behavior. They are not impulsive. They are not reactive. They are not fragile. They have learned to stay. Staying is a spiritual act. Staying when results are slow. Staying when feedback is absent. Staying when no one is watching. Most people quit in silence, not failure. They leave when applause stops, when novelty fades, when the emotional reward disappears. Emotionally disciplined people don't require emotional payment to continue. Their discipline is internal, and internal discipline compounds. Over time, small consistent actions create disproportionate results. Habits stabilize, focus sharpens, identity changes. Prosperity begins to feel natural rather than forced. This is why emotionally disciplined people often rise quietly. They don't rush, they don't chase, they don't compare, they build. And building dismantles limitation. Limitation cannot survive in the presence of consistency. It cannot compete with someone who does not stop when emotion demands escape. This is why emotional discipline is power. Not power over others, but power over self. And self-governance is the highest form of authority. Once you learn to govern your emotions, limitation loses its voice. It can no longer convince you to quit. It can no longer scare you into retreat. It can no longer distract you into delay. You move forward, steadily, quietly, relentlessly. And that is why emotionally disciplined people are dangerous, not because they fight limitation, but because limitation can no longer stop them. Many people believe emotional discipline is something you either have or you don't. They say things like, "I'm just not disciplined. That's not my personality. Some people are strong, I'm emotional." But emotional discipline is not a personality trait. It is a trained skill. No one is born knowing how to govern impulses, tolerate discomfort, or stay consistent under emotional pressure. What looks like strength in others is usually training you didn't witness. Emotionally undisciplined people often mistake habit for nature. They assume that because they react emotionally now, this reaction defines who they are. But reaction is learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. Emotional discipline is built the same way any skill is built, through repetition under resistance. You don't become disciplined by feeling ready. You become disciplined by acting while feeling unready. Every time you continue despite discomfort, your nervous system learns something new. I can handle this. And each repetition weakens emotion's authority. This is why emotional discipline feels unnatural at first. Your system is used to reacting, used to escaping discomfort, used to negotiating commitments based on feeling. When you interrupt that pattern, the mind resists. It resists because patterns feel safe, even dysfunctional ones. Emotionally disciplined people were not spared emotion. They simply trained themselves to pause before obeying it. They learned to create distance between feeling and action. That distance is everything. In that space, choice exists. Without it, emotion decides automatically. Training emotional discipline does not mean eliminating emotion. It means expanding tolerance. It means increasing the window in which you can feel discomfort without needing immediate relief. This tolerance is what allows consistency, and consistency is what builds prosperity. Emotionally undisciplined people often wait for transformation to feel dramatic. They want a moment of breakthrough, a surge of motivation, a sudden shift. But discipline grows quietly, in ordinary days, in uncelebrated choices, in moments no one sees. Each small act of obedience to intention strengthens emotional muscles. Over time, reactions soften, impulses lose urgency. Resistance feels manageable. This is how identity changes. You stop seeing yourself as emotional and start seeing yourself as reliable. You begin to trust your ability to follow through. Self-respect grows. Confidence stabilizes. Prosperity depends on this reliability. Because growth requires showing up repeatedly, not perfectly but consistently. And consistency is impossible without emotional discipline. This is why emotional discipline must be practiced daily. Not in extremes, not through punishment, but through small intentional acts of follow-through. Every time you keep going when emotion says stop, you train the skill, and skills compound. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes normal. What once required effort becomes identity. And emotional discipline stops being something you try to do. It becomes who you are, not because you were born that way, but because you trained yourself to lead instead of react. Most people believe discipline is born when emotion disappears. They wait to feel calm. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel ready. And while they wait, nothing changes. True discipline is not born from the absence of emotion. It is born from the ability to feel and continue. This is the turning point most people never reach. Emotion will always be present. Fear, discouragement, impatience, anxiety, doubt. These emotions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of humanity. What separates those who prosper from those who remain stuck is not what they feel, but what they do while feeling it. Emotionally undisciplined people stop when emotion becomes uncomfortable. They interpret discomfort as a command to retreat. When emotion rises, action falls. Emotionally disciplined people do something radically different. They allow emotion to exist without obeying it. They feel fear and continue. They feel tired and show up. They feel resistance and stay consistent. This ability is not natural. It is trained, and it changes everything. When you learn to feel without stopping, you break emotion's authority over your future. You teach your nervous system a new rule. Feeling does not decide direction. This rule rewires behavior. Instead of asking, "How do I feel?" before acting, you begin to ask, "What did I commit to?" Emotion becomes a companion, not a leader. This is where discipline is born, not from force, not from suppression, but from maturity. Maturity understands that emotions fluctuate, but values remain. That discomfort is temporary, but consequences are lasting. That progress requires continuity, not emotional agreement. This is also deeply spiritual. Spiritual maturity is the ability to obey without emotional reward, to remain faithful when results are invisible, to stay aligned when feelings are unstable. Faith without emotional discipline becomes fragile. Emotion without discipline becomes chaos. But when emotion is felt and not followed, discipline becomes unshakable. This is why prosperity stabilizes at this stage. You stop starting over. You stop breaking momentum. You stop negotiating with impulses. Your life becomes governed internally, and internal government creates external order. At this point, discipline no longer feels like effort. It feels like identity. You no longer force consistency. You embody it. You trust yourself to continue even when emotion resists. That self-trust is priceless, because prosperity does not grow in bursts. It grows in continuity. And continuity is impossible without the ability to feel without stopping. This is the real key. Not motivation, not intensity, not inspiration, but emotional leadership. You are allowed to feel everything, but from this point forward, you are no longer allowed to let feeling decide who you become. When you learn to feel without stopping, discipline is born. And when discipline is born, prosperity finally has a place to stay.